Namaste, everyone. It is Michelle Skaletski-Boyd, intuitive medium and best-selling author. Hi, everybody. Before I officially kind of start any kind of messages, I'd like to be able to set the space. And so the very first thing I'd like everyone to do who is watching or who's tuning in is to recognize like where you are right now in terms of core inner child wounds, in terms of issues that had been buried and now all of a sudden they're resurfacing again, be it health issues, job situation, etc. So anything in our past that has wounded us. So this has been going on, and people are just kind of coming out of this, and we're kind of in the aftermath. And some people are really spun around, and some people are projecting still some of their BS onto other people. And so I just want to set the space and just let everybody know that you're not alone. This has been going on for a little while, and take some deep breaths. So I want to begin there. Just close your eyes if it feels good, and recognize that what's occurred, this stirring up, this energy that felt really heavy and felt really painful is the best word to describe. For myself, I felt like I was sort of in this cave, I was like licking my wounds from like a lot of years ago. And I'm going, why am I even still stuck in these energies? Well, obviously we bury things far enough into our history. Whenever you're fighting with somebody, let's say that you have a quarrel and it just keeps happening. You're fighting with your sibling, or you're fighting with your friend, or you get into a bickering match constantly with your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend, or you're in this constant fighting, and it keeps coming up, and it's like, why do we keep circling around this? Why does this keep coming up? You could see it differently. So for myself, I was like, wait a minute, I have this trigger and this particular energy around people who drink too much. Okay, this was my pattern. And when I see someone drink too much and act really foolish and really dumb and really stupid, I get triggered. And so where does this come from, right? I had to go all the way back into my childhood and really look at where was this pressing on my wound? Where was that happening, and why was it happening? And how come it was still there? And I had to go in and clear it. And now that I've cleared it, holy man, do I feel a lot lighter. But I had this undercurrent, this, let's call it a contract, that I wasn't even aware of. For those of you who follow me, you know that I always talk about whether you believe in past life energy or you don't, we're all recycled energy. It's been proven that we're all energy. So anything that kind of triggered us, any trauma, it just kept stirring. And so in the case of me getting triggered by people that were acting foolish and stupid and dumb and doing, crazy things, and I didn't feel safe, right? It that was an old childhood wound. It was really come to the surface for me, and I realized that I had a old contract, an old vow that I made, probably from another lifetime or recycled energy that came in, that said that I have to put myself in suffering in order to help somebody with their disease, in the case of alcoholism, or I have to put myself in the line of fire in order to help heal someone. I have to physically like hurt or take on self-destruction patterns or pains. And I went, oh no, this is old 3D grid stuff. Like, I'm clearing it now. And so I'm here because I feel like I'm not the only one who went through this, yet I also feel like some people are right on the brink. It's like I have this pattern and I see it and it's coming up, but I'm not able to understand the vow or the contract behind it, or I'm not understanding why I keep getting into certain tiffs or certain spitting patterns. Now, this is deep stuff, so I'm not going to be able to like completely take you down into the pattern itself, but there might be some gems or some insights that I can help you with that can at least get you on the path and get you started into this healing. And for me, as soon as it happened, it was almost like I had stepped on a landmine. And whereas before I was self-destroying, self-destructing in terms of harm's way, this time when I stepped on the landmine, it was like all the fragments of energy came in front of me and I was able to see what was happening. And I went, wow, this is so powerful. Like to be able to see it and have the recognition and the self-awareness is the first step of healing. I mean, anything, I'm talking about being triggered by alcoholism. You go into Al-Anon or you go into AA, just an example. And I have so many friends and so many clients who are saying people were put into rehab, people who are really like on the brink of just craziness, going into seizures or having major health problems and nowhere to turn. I had someone who I know who a loved one had committed suicide, just couldn't take the pain anymore. And so I know that we've just been through like this massive amount of energy, and that's why I'm inviting all of you. I'm kind of doing a big circle, but I'm inviting all of you just to take a deep breath, be present with yourself, like ground, and I want to start a tiny little meditation to set the space for all of you. I'd like for everybody just to kind of notice your breath. Oftentimes we're not aware that we're breathing. We're breathing shallow, or we're breathing heavy, or we're not even aware that we have this beautiful connection to spirit through the breath. So if you haven't yet connected with your breath, if you haven't meditated at all today, this is your chance, especially if you're getting ready for bed, right? Transitioning. So nice inhale and exhale. Allowing that energy to flow through you. And just acknowledging that it's almost like, so this weekend I took my kiddo to a little amusement park and there was bumper cars there. And bumper cars are kind of like pushing you all over the place and they're fun and you can see the impact when you're going to hit somebody, but then all of a sudden somebody gets you from behind and surprises you and your energy field is like, whoa. That's kind of what we've been through. So we're just starting to settle back down. It's like we have this rush of adrenaline that's happening. So as you're connecting with your breath, just notice what that feels like to allow your energies to settle into calmness again, into some peace. And what you're doing is you're like resetting your nervous system, because your nervous system has been a little bit probably frazzled or surprised or even in shock by some of this recollection and these reminiscent and these memories of childhood or anything that was being pushed in terms of inner child wounds. The other piece is that the pattern, and I'd like for you as you're breathing, just to acknowledge that a lot of stuff that got pushed onto us by other people was projection. It was a huge projection on other people's parts. And so as an example, I had people that I knew whose spouses were like verbally coming after them. And I was looking at the energy and I'm going, listen, they're not even mad at you. They're mad at their parent, but they're not even aware that they're mad at their parent. And so if you can just hold that in your understanding that if anybody came after you, let's say verbally, or especially relationships that you've had for a really long time, and it's like, wow, I thought we were past this, or you haven't called me that name in so long, or you haven't verbally abused me or hurt me ever. There was that one time and we said we'd never do it again, but now you just did it again. Like if there's anything like that going on, just know it's because that person has a childhood wound that hasn't yet been healed, and they were projecting their own stuff onto you. And you might have done it to someone as well. So just acknowledge that with the breath. Just settle into that and know that you're not alone. Know that there are other people all around the globe who are going through this as well. Now, some people might wonder, like, why? Why do we need to go through this crap? Like, when is it going to stop? Like, how often are we going to continue to get this? And what I will tell you is that this stirring, all this stirring, and literally an awakening that's happening within our energy field is all to our advantage. It's like, with our household especially, and a lot of my private clients, there was so much, like kids who had gone through divorce as an example, and all of a sudden you have abandonment issues and you're like, I thought I was past that, but now you're projecting your own stuff onto other people. It's these kinds of things that when you thought you were healed but you weren't. What I will say is that you really never really addressed the abandonment issue to the degree that you needed to. So for myself, I had talked about, how painful it was to be around people who drank too much and how they lost consciousness and how they weren't present and how I always had to be on guard or on alert. But I never really went into my wounded child and talked to her. I, as an adult, kind of looked at it from my own perspective, and I'm good now and I'm healed. But there was a lot of stuff that she perceived as, she took things personal. She took different things that occurred personally. And so if you look back at your own childhood and you look at whatever had been projected onto you from your parents, because they were projecting their own parents' stuff onto you, this is all old 3D grid stuff. And so anything that you had taken personal, that you thought was intended for you, that came down to you through your parents, I want you to know that none of it was intended for you. Though it felt that way. I mean, it's like, how could you say that, Michelle, when they're literally pointing at me and telling me that I'm, incompetent, or that I'm not responsible, or, and what I'm telling you is that they have their own inner child wounds that they were projecting onto you in that moment. And though it felt very personal, because of that, that old contract, let's say, where I'm supposed to help mommy and daddy heal, even if it hurts me, that's that old 3D energy. That is, it's time for us to clear that. And we're sort of left with the carnage and the wreckage, and we're looking and we're going, wow. Now, for those of you who are very self-aware, you're looking at this and going, okay, how did I attract this? What lesson am I supposed to learn? And what I'll say to you is that sometimes we overdo it with the what lesson am I supposed to learn. There are phases. I mean, before Wayne Dyer died, he had a talk, and one of his last talks, he talked about 3 phases of awakening, and that first phase is suffering. And so let's just say that our parents and our parents' parents and their parents' parents, right, they were all in this stage of suffering where I'm going to verbally abuse you because I was abused, and now I'm going to project all my pain onto you. And then the child has to suffer in order to try and help mom or dad, and they're going to be their mirror, and they're in hopes that somebody finally wakes up. Okay, that's I'm using that as an example. Wayne doesn't use that example, but for this talk, it's relevant. So the first phase is suffering. The second phase of awakening, Wayne talks about, is life lessons. Okay, and those of you who followed my best-selling books, Soulfelt Words, you absolutely know that those books were all around life lessons. Like, okay, this is a particular perception that I had, that I carried, and this is how I can see it new now. So, is there a life lesson to this? Yes. Here's the life lesson: it was never yours. Any name that was ever called to you, anything that was ever done in terms of a put down, any kind of perfectionist measure bar that you were asked to step up to, it was never ever intended for you. It was never, don't ever take it personal. It was not yours to carry. That's what I want you to really understand, is it was their own stuff that they had not healed being projected onto you. So if there's a life lesson, it's don't take it personal. Don't attach yourself to it. Don't devalue yourself or feel like you're not worthy because of those things. Okay. The third thing that Wayne talks about is that once you see the pattern, is you start to get ahead of it. And that's what I'd like for you to know, is that now that the carnage, the wreckage, we're in it, we see it, and we're recognizing, no, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to suffer anymore. This, if 5D energy is, it's not about suffering. The life lesson is it was never about me. They were projecting their own stuff onto me. And now, how do I get ahead of it? How do I get ahead of this? Well, first of all, you clear out the old karma, the old soul contracts, the old vows that you have. In my case, it was that I'm going to literally hurt myself and harm myself in order to heal people. That's a very worthy, let's say, in some weird way, but I'm not going to do that. So I've cleared all that. And so you now get ahead of it. And by doing that, you're really helping not only yourself, but you're helping create a new vibration for other people, so they know they don't have to take that path. And you're also helping generations, not only after you, but the generations who are still here on this earth, who came before you. They're going to see how you're doing it, and you're going to start to attune them into that frequency. So what I'd like for you to do is just hold in mind whatever kind of energies were really heavy, thing that had been projected onto you, or you were projecting onto others, and or both, which was in my case. I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing that too. Just hold that in your heart, and we're going to ask for some assistance in terms of how to clear this. So that's what these cards are going to be about, how to fully be able to get ahead of it. So there's 1 and 2 here. All right, so we have 1 that's facing me directly and 1 that's flipped upside down. And for those of you who have had any kind of readings with me in the past, you know that my way of doing this is that if it's flipped upside down, it just means really pay attention. So we have 1 where it's like, pay attention. Okay. So the very first card that came in is called the Divine Director. So it's working directly with your spiritual team, basically, is what I'm seeing here. And when I'm looking at the card and I am reading into the energy itself, it's like, how many of you have gone in and actually asked your higher self, asked the God within you, what you can do to clear this? Now, everybody's triggers and trauma and childhood wounds are different. And so let's take a moment and ask. So take a nice deep breath. Tuning in to your own energy, dropping down into sacred space, being sure that you're grounded and rooted. Checking your energy field and making sure you're centered. I'd like for you to bring to mind whatever that trigger, that trauma was, whatever keeps resurfacing even though you thought you were past it, bringing it into heart, bringing it into mind. Now I want you to notice how old you are when you feel the biggest trigger, the biggest trauma. Just notice how old you are. And notice at that age what you might look like, who you might have been in terms of size and hair, and where you might have been in comparison to your parents in terms of, did you reach their knee or were you smaller? Could you look them in the eye? Like, where were you height-wise? And just notice yourself. Notice your personality, whether or not you dressed a certain way. Did you follow around one of the parents more than the other? And notice whether or not you had a perception that might have been mirroring the perception of one of your parents during this time. Now what this is this is building self-awareness. And self-awareness is the very first step. All right, you can open your eyes. So now that you know how old you were, now that you know whether or not you took on a parent's perception and whose perception that might have been, I'd like for you to consider again your trigger or your trauma. And just notice how it applies in your world. This next card is, it means soul expansion, that you've retreated from the world recently. Yeah, especially trauma, it does that, right? Maybe you've not been as active socially or spiritually, but this time of inner rest has really paid off. I know that consciously you're now aware how connected you are to God and to all living things. So this is your opportunity for you to take that energy and to really notice it. What was transformed? What was transmuted? What was burned to the point where, as I said, you could see the aftermath in a different way. So let's return to closing the eyes. So there you are, and you're at a certain age, and you have a certain perception, and you're noticing that that perception is really coming from someone else. So notice whose perception you're picking up on, okay? So now that person has a perception and is sharing their perception with you. Now consider the possibility that that perception that they're sharing with you is a projection of their own childhood wound. So look at their parents for a minute and you'll see it. You'll see it. So in other words, and I'm just going to give you a real quick example so you understand it. If you had a parent who was constantly talking about, in my case, look, you know, there's alcoholism, there's drinking, there's irresponsibility, there's this, that, there's that, you now take on that perception. But if you look at that person who taught you that and you look at their childhood, you'll see where the wound is. You'll see why they're projecting their childhood wound through these lenses. And as soon as you see it, you're going to notice how everything's connected, including perceptions that get passed down from one generation to another generation to another generation. And so I'd like for you to call in your spiritual team, your God, your source, your divine creator, and ask for this particular line of energy to be burned, to be transformed, to be transmuted, to be released. On any and all levels, on any and all aspects, in any and all lifetimes. And thank you, God, source, and so it is. So now everything has been cleared on the spiritual level. Now that we're aware of what's happening, we can have a conversation with our child and we can let that child know it was never about you. It was never about you. It was never intended for you to carry this. It was never intended for you to take on those perceptions. It was never intended for you to continue to attract that same energy into your field later on in life. Use the breath. Use that beautiful transmutation energy to allow it to dissipate, not only in the spiritual, but in the physical, in the emotional, in the cellular level. All right, good. Now I've had a couple of you asking about private sessions with me. First of all, I'm a hypnotherapist, I'm an intuitive, and so I definitely will take you to the different levels of energy that you need to go, and you got a very small sampling of how that occurs. So go to my website. You can find me at Soulfelt, SOULFELT.com. Go there, get onto my calendar. You can schedule yourself for a pre-session consultation, and then we'll just have a chat. We'll talk. I'll let you know my rates. I'll talk to you about what it is that I'm perceiving and how it is that I feel we can go about connecting. And it's way more in depth than this. All right, everybody, take care. Bye. Thanks for joining me.